The air is thick, damp, and cold, curling around your lungs like smoke. Stone walls rise, slick with moisture and time, enclosing you in a world where light has long abandoned its post. Somewhere in the shadows, water drips, slow, precise, unrelenting, as if counting your heartbeat. And there, at the center of the room, it waits, a towering, human-shaped sarcophagus of iron, its doors yawning like the gaping maw of some ancient predator. Within, a forest of spikes, each gleaming wickedly in the faint torchlight. This is the Iron Maiden, or is it? For centuries, its name has echoed through whispers of medieval dungeons, public executions, and whispered tales of unspeakable pain. They say it was built not to kill quickly, but to prolong agony, to bend flesh and spirit into a grotesque performance. Imagine the dread of being sealed inside, darkness swallowing you, the iron doors cold and unyielding. Every movement sends spikes into the soft flesh, calculated to avoid immediate death, but guarantee suffering. A scream rises, muffled against iron walls, fading into the hollow echoes of the dungeon. Outside, a crowd watches in horrified fascination, their fear mirrored in the twisted faces of spectators centuries ago. This fear was no accident. Torture in the Middle Ages was a message. Defiance would meet a meticulously measured public display of pain. And yet, the Iron Maiden itself presents a paradox. Despite its fearsome reputation, the earliest known references appear not in medieval records, but centuries later. A small, rusted device, exhibited in Nuremberg in the 18th century, became the supposed relic of cruelty. It bore a name that would haunt imaginations, but no chronicler of inquisitions, no court records, no prison logs mention it in the days it was claimed to have tormented the condemned. It was a story born of fear, or perhaps of invention. Scholars suggest the device may have been constructed long after the Middle Ages, a physical embodiment of the horror Europe wanted to believe it had survived, an object of propaganda masquerading as history. And yet the legend took root. It preyed upon the imagination, a coffin not of wood, but of steel, lined with spikes that could reach the soul as easily as the flesh. The Iron Maiden became more than a machine. It became a symbol, a warning, a story told to bind the mind with terror long before the body could be threatened. But consider the paradox: a device designed for control, yet itself controlled by stories. Its reputation grew more potent than any victim it may have claimed. Each mention in pamphlets, books, and later exhibitions fanned the flames of dread. People feared it, not because they had seen it, but because they could imagine it. And imagination, in the hands of those who rule through terror, is a weapon more enduring than steel spikes. So, was it ever real? Or has history misled us, cloaking fabrication in the patina of legend? Here lies the heart of the mystery. The Iron Maiden, that image of methodical torment, may have never crushed a single human body, and yet it has imprisoned minds for centuries, teaching fear as surely as any iron door ever could. And now we must ask ourselves a deeper question. If the Iron Maiden existed only as a tale, a specter of human cruelty, what does that say about our fascination with horror? Are we drawn to it because it shows the limits of the human body, or because it mirrors the darker recesses of the human mind? History, in this case, becomes less about iron and more about imagination, how the threat of pain can dominate consciousness, shape behavior, and define eras. Somewhere, in a forgotten corner of a museum, a rusted figure stands, silent, immobile, a relic of fear, not necessarily cruelty. It is enough for us to shudder, enough for stories to take root, to teach obedience, to haunt generations. Yet even as the spikes glint under the gallery lights, we feel the truth gnawing at us. The Iron Maiden is a ghost, a warning, a lesson in how terror can survive without substance. And still, the question lingers. If the device was a myth, what dark ingenuity inspired its creation? Who first imagined the spikes to the coffin, the slow descent into darkness? And why did the story cling to the European imagination for centuries? The answer lies hidden in the dusty chronicles of the Enlightenment, in the minds of those who sought to define themselves against the barbarism of the past. They crafted monsters, not always in flesh, but in story, powerful enough to chill, to warn, to endure. The Iron Maiden waits silently, the cold iron door never opening, the spikes forever untested, and yet its shadow stretches across centuries, reminding us that fear, even when manufactured, wields a potency all its own. From here, the path splits. One trail leads into the documented truths of torture in Europe, the other into the construction of myth and propaganda. And as we step forward, the line between history and horror blurs. Europe in the 18th century was a continent wrestling with its past. The age of reason was dawning, and intellectuals began to scrutinize the shadows of history with both curiosity and judgment. Tales of barbaric punishments, cruel inquisitions, and medieval horrors fascinated them, not only as chronicles of suffering, but as proof of civilization's triumph over cruelty. Among these tales, one object captured the imagination more than any other: the Iron Maiden. The first written mentions of a device by that name appear in Germany, long after the alleged Middle Ages had ended. Curiously, there are no legal records, no eyewitness accounts from prisons, no trial transcripts documenting its use. Instead, we find pamphlets, sensational stories, and museum catalogs, all portraying it as the ultimate instrument of torture. One of the earliest known references describes a maiden in Nuremberg, standing tall and deadly in a shadowed corner, its interior lined with spikes. The text recounts the agony it was said to inflict, though no name or victim could be traced in historical fact. By the 19th century, the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg became a fixture in exhibitions. Visitors would marvel, shudder, and whisper about the device's ghastly purpose. Some historians suggest that the exhibit itself was altered or even partially fabricated to meet public expectations of medieval cruelty. Rusted spikes were sharpened or repositioned, doors rehinged for effect, and the story carefully polished for maximum terror. Museums capitalized on the public's morbid fascination, using fear as both entertainment and pedagogy. It was a lesson, yes, but also a spectacle. The invention of the Iron Maiden myth served multiple purposes. On one level, it offered the Enlightenment a vivid contrast between the enlightened present and a dark, brutal past. The tale of a cold, spiked sarcophagus allowed observers to feel moral and intellectual superiority over those imagined to have lived under tyranny. On another level, it was propaganda, a tool to shape perceptions of authority, justice, and human suffering. The horrors described, whether real or imagined, reinforced the moral of caution. Cruelty was a marker of lawlessness, ignorance, and barbarism. Yet the public was not the only audience. Scholars, writers, and travelers spread the myth across Europe. Illustrated plates, engravings, and detailed descriptions depicted the Iron Maiden with chilling precision, showing a human figure trapped, impaled yet alive, agony frozen in time. One engraving from the late 18th century shows the figure's contorted body, mouth open in a silent scream, hands pressed against iron walls. The effect was both educational and terrifying, history as a cautionary tale, morality as spectacle, fear as teacher. Even more intriguing, some evidence suggests the idea of the Iron Maiden may have been inspired by earlier forms of torture that existed, though not in the form we imagine today. Medieval Europe did have a catalog of horrific devices: the rack, the thumbscrew, iron cages suspended from walls. Each caused genuine suffering, and each served as a public reminder of the consequences of disobedience. The Iron Maiden, however, elevated this principle to symbolic perfection, a single, terrifying object that encapsulated the collective imagination of pain. Its spikes were less about anatomy than narrative. They were designed to terrify, not to document historical accuracy. By the 19th century, the Nuremberg exhibit became the canonical Iron Maiden, cited in books, newspapers, and lectures. It was positioned as the ultimate medieval punishment, though scholars increasingly questioned its authenticity. The device was never used in courts, never referenced in trial records, and no reliable first-hand accounts survived. The tale of the Iron Maiden had become a legend, powerful because it was plausible, horrifying because it spoke to the human capacity for cruelty, and enduring because it appealed to our morbid fascination. And yet, the story leaves a subtle unease. If the Iron Maiden was largely fabricated, what does that reveal about the ways history is told? How often do myths masquerade as truth, shaping our understanding of pain, justice, and authority? It becomes clear that the device itself is less important than the shadow it casts. A psychological echo of terror, a reminder that fear is contagious, even without a tangible source. As historians delved deeper into the archives, a pattern emerged. Mentions of the Iron Maiden clustered in the 18th and 19th centuries. Some pamphlets explicitly framed the device as an educational tool, warning against rebellion and vice. Others treated it as a macabre curiosity, emphasizing shock value over verifiable fact. The spikes, the doors, the agonized victim. Each detail was more narrative than mechanical, more story than history. And here lies the turning point. The Iron Maiden exists today as a paradox. It is a museum piece, a symbol, and a ghost of fear. But it may never have inflicted real pain. Its legend eclipses its reality, and its power lies not in steel, but in our imagination, our horror, and our reflection on the human capacity for cruelty. But the question remains unresolved. If the Iron Maiden itself may have been a fabrication, what about the many other instruments of torture that truly existed? What horrors were recorded in medieval Europe that could rival or even surpass this legendary sarcophagus? And what does that tell us about the society that built them, the minds that wielded them, and the human instincts that demanded such cruelty? The investigation moves forward into the grim, often overlooked truths of medieval punishment. Beyond myth, we will confront instruments designed for agony, prisons filled with terror, and a world in which human suffering was wielded as both justice and entertainment. The Iron Maiden may have been a ghost, but the horrors that inspired it were very real. And so, we step into darkness once more, leaving legend behind, moving toward the step into the shadowed corridors of medieval Europe, where stone walls echoed with cries that history has preserved only in fragmentary whispers. Torture was not an anomaly. It was a ritual, a tool, a performance, and sometimes a method of governance. Yet the tales that have survived are chilling in their precision, terrifying in the intimacy of their detail. One of the most infamous instruments was the rack, a simple frame with rollers. Victims were bound by hands and feet, and the rollers slowly stretched their limbs. Bones groaned under pressure, joints dislocated with careful, unhurried cruelty, until confessions, whether true or forced, were extracted. Each turn of the roller was a calculated negotiation between life and suffering, the pain administered in measured increments to maintain consciousness while eroding resistance. Another device, the strappado, relied on suspension. Victims' hands were tied behind their backs, and they were lifted into the air by a rope. Gravity alone twisted shoulders out of socket. Each swing was agony amplified. For public audiences, the sight was horrifying, yet fascinating, a demonstration of authority rendered in flesh and bone. Those who watched learned a lesson about obedience and consequence. The state's power could reach the body in ways the mind could scarcely endure. Beyond these instruments were cages, thumbscrews, and iron gauntlets, each designed to exact maximum suffering while leaving some part of the body intact. Torture was a balance between immediate punishment and extended spectacle. In some courts, criminals endured multiple instruments in sequence, each stage more excruciating than the last. Records describe the careful preparation of victims, the slow cadence of pain administered to ensure compliance, confession, or the edification of the crowd. Public executions and tortures were themselves performances. People gathered not out of compassion, but because the ritual provided both entertainment and moral instruction. The suffering of the condemned was a story told in real time. Sin punished, authority affirmed, society reminded of the consequences of transgression. It was an early form of psychological warfare, where fear became a tool far more enduring than physical pain, yet not all torture was public. Private chambers existed where interrogations took place behind closed doors. These rooms were dim, suffused with the smell of sweat, iron, and human dread. Instruments of pain waited silently, their shapes honed to terrorize the mind before they even touched flesh. Confessions extracted in such chambers were often the result of meticulous cruelty, the strategic application of fear, the careful calibration of pain, the exploitation of human vulnerability. Here one could see the origins of the Iron Maiden myth, the fascination with a device that promised calculated, intimate, and inescapable suffering. Accounts survive of individuals who endured prolonged torment. One record tells of a man accused of heresy, bound and stretched on the rack until his joints dislocated, yet still conscious. The psychological toll, the anticipation of the next rotation, the knowledge that every move might exacerbate the agony, was as punishing as the device itself. Torture was, in many ways, a study in human resilience and fragility. It sought to extract truth, submission, or spectacle. But in doing so, it revealed the darkest recesses of human endurance. The real horror lies not only in the instruments themselves, but in their social and psychological purpose. Torture was designed to enforce conformity, to demonstrate power, and to normalize cruelty in ways that transcended the individual victim. The fear it produced was communal, shared, and contagious. It is within this context that the Iron Maiden, whether myth or reality, found fertile ground. The imagination of the public, already attuned to instruments of pain, seized upon the idea of a device that could combine all terrors into a single, chilling figure. The legend amplified what existed. It did not need to be real to terrify. Yet historians caution against equating legend with reality. While the Iron Maiden as a device may have been a fabrication, the existence of torture itself is incontrovertible. Courts, inquisitions, and prisons were filled with instruments designed for suffering. Death, mutilation, and coercion were common tools of control. And it is precisely this context that makes the myth of the Iron Maiden so compelling. It is a story that resonates with the truth of human cruelty, even if the device itself never claimed a life. The story begins to converge here. The terror of the Iron Maiden, its spikes and doors, becomes a symbolic distillation of centuries of real human suffering. It embodies what many victims endured on the rack, in the strappado, in private chambers or public squares. The device itself may have been a ghost, but the fear it represents is rooted in reality, a terrifying fusion of imagination and historical fact. And yet, even as we confront these truths, questions linger. If torture was so pervasive, how did legends like the Iron Maiden shape perceptions of the past? How did fear become a commodity, both for rulers and storytellers? And why does the image of a cold, spiked coffin continue to haunt us, even centuries later? The answers lie in the interplay of myth, memory, and morality. The next chapter will unravel how the Iron Maiden transformed from fabricated artifact into enduring symbol, bridging history and legend in a way that continues to grip our collective imagination. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Iron Maiden had achieved a strange immortality. Whether or not it ever gripped a human body in its cruel embrace mattered little. Its power now lay in imagination, in the shadows of minds eager for horror. The Enlightenment, a period sought by reason and reflection, paradoxically nurtured its legend. Intellectuals and moralists sought to define themselves against the darkness of the past, to elevate the present by highlighting the barbarity of their forebears. The Iron Maiden, with its cold steel and jagged spikes, became the perfect symbol of the Dark Ages Europe had supposedly outgrown. It appeared in literature, sketches, and moral treatises, not as a documented device, but as a metaphor for human cruelty. Illustrations depicted the figure of a woman impaled upon spikes, her face frozen in silent screams, her body twisted unnaturally. Authors described it with a precision that made it palpable, yet none claimed first-hand knowledge. Museums, too, played their part. The Nuremberg exhibit became a touchstone, drawing curious crowds from across Europe. Visitors whispered about the device's history, shivered at its silhouette, and left carrying a story crafted as much from imagination as from metal. The Iron Maiden had transcended the realm of physical objects. It was now a symbol, a story, a warning, and a fascination all at once. This transformation was no accident. Propaganda, moral instruction, and entertainment converged. By presenting the Iron Maiden as an emblem of past cruelty, storytellers and curators offered a lesson. Humanity had endured, civilization had triumphed, and the horrors of authority could be witnessed safely, from a distance. Yet there was a darker lesson hidden beneath the surface. Fear itself, even when fabricated, could shape perception, behavior, and society. The Iron Maiden, whether real or not, demonstrated that terror could survive in imagination alone, and that stories of cruelty could influence morality, obedience, and collective consciousness. Psychologically, this is what makes the Iron Maiden so fascinating. Humans are drawn to fear, not merely because we experience it physically, but because it engages our attention, sharpens our instincts, and teaches lessons about danger and consequence. The Iron Maiden offered a concentrated, terrifying example of suffering, tapping into basic instincts and anxieties. The fear of pain, confinement, helplessness, and the unknown. The spikes were not just metal. They were symbolic instruments, projections of every human dread ever inflicted or imagined. Even centuries later, its silhouette is enough to stir shivers. Legends like this endure because they satisfy both caution and curiosity. The Iron Maiden, despite its historical ambiguity, became a canvas onto which societies projected anxieties about justice, authority, and morality. Writers and historians debated its authenticity, yet the story persisted. Its appeal was not anchored in fact, but in resonance. It crystallized our fears, demonstrated the extremities of cruelty, and served as a moral mirror, reflecting both the dark impulses of the past and the vulnerabilities of the human mind. And yet, the Iron Maiden's story is not only about collective fear, it is also about personal reflection. Its legend challenges us to confront the ways we respond to threat, control, and suffering. Even today, we are drawn to stories of torment, fascination, and horror, not for the sake of pain itself, but because fear teaches, warns, and illuminates. The Iron Maiden is thus more than a tale of torture. It is a lens into human psychology, a reminder of how imagination can amplify terror, and how myths can endure longer than metal. Historians now caution against conflating legend with reality, yet the Iron Maiden's symbolic power remains undeniable. It bridges centuries, connecting the actual horrors of medieval torture with the human fascination for stories of suffering. Its spikes may never have pierced flesh, but they have penetrated the imagination, shaping perceptions of history, morality, and human cruelty. In essence, the Iron Maiden achieved the very purpose it supposedly served, instilling fear. And it did so across generations, without ever needing to harm a soul. And here lies the final paradox. The Iron Maiden, whether real or fabricated, mirrors the human condition. It reminds us that fear can be as potent as steel, imagination as sharp as spikes, and stories as enduring as time itself. It teaches caution, morality, and reflection, but also reveals a shadow of fascination with suffering that persists in human nature. It is a story that refuses to die, because fear, myth, and curiosity are intertwined, inseparable threads in the tapestry of history. As we step back from the museum halls, the sketches, and the pamphlets, one question remains. Why do we cling to stories like this? Why does the Iron Maiden, a device that may never have existed, continue to haunt our collective imagination? Perhaps it is because it tells us something timeless, that human cruelty and the fear it inspires are always real, even when the instruments are not. That terror, once conceived, can endure beyond reality, shaping generations, morality, and imagination. And so, the Iron Maiden stands, silent, still, and unyielding, not in dungeons, not in courts, but in the shadowed corridors of human thought. Its spikes may never pierce flesh, but they pierce our imagination, forcing us to confront fear, morality, and the dark allure of cruelty itself. And as long as humans seek stories of horror, the legend of the Iron Maiden will endure, a chilling testament to the power of myth and the shadows within us all. The Iron Maiden, a towering silhouette of steel and spikes, has long haunted our collective imagination. Its legend eclipsed its reality, or lack thereof. Some say it never confined a single human body. Yet the stories, the sketches, the pamphlets, and the museum exhibits have ensured that its shadow persists. Across centuries, it has become a symbol of human cruelty, a tangible manifestation of the fears we carry, both inherited and personal. To trace its origin is to walk the fine line between myth and history. The first mentions appeared in the 18th century in Germany, centuries after the Middle Ages had passed. It became a fixture in exhibitions, illustrations, and moral treatises, shaped as much by imagination as by metalwork. The device's fame grew not through its use, but through its symbolism, a distilled representation of agony, terror, and authority. The Iron Maiden may have been a fabrication, but it was a fabrication built upon truth. The documented horrifying practices of medieval torture. For those condemned to actual instruments, racks, strappados, iron cages, pain was immediate and undeniable. Bones dislocated, flesh pierced, nerves stretched to their limits. Torture served multiple purposes: extraction of confessions, demonstration of authority, public warning. Each device, each method, was a careful calculation of suffering. The Iron Maiden, real or imagined, crystallized this reality. It is a reminder that human cruelty, whether performed or imagined, can shape behavior, morals, and society, and therein lies its enduring power. The Iron Maiden teaches more than history. It teaches about the human mind. Fear is its true instrument. It instructs, warns, and fascinates without moving a single spike. It captivates our attention because it resonates with primal instincts. The dread of confinement, the anticipation of pain, the inevitability of helplessness. It lingers in consciousness because imagination can transform stories into lived experience, shadows into reality. In this way, the Iron Maiden transcends history to become a psychological artifact, a reflection of our collective anxieties. The device's symbolic reach extends beyond museums and textbooks. It confronts us with enduring questions about morality and fascination. Why are we drawn to tales of cruelty, even when we know they are exaggerated or fabricated? Why do we recoil in horror, yet linger in fascination? The Iron Maiden is not merely a relic of history. It is a mirror held up to humanity. It reveals the tension between curiosity and revulsion, between the need for caution and the attraction to spectacle. It reminds us that fear, when embodied in story or symbol, can shape behavior more effectively than any physical device ever could. Yet there is a subtle irony in its legacy. The Iron Maiden exists most vividly in the mind. Its spikes may never have torn flesh. Its doors may never have closed upon a human figure. And yet the terror it inspires is real. In this, the device is a metaphor for human history itself. Memory, imagination, and storytelling can magnify cruelty, enforce obedience, and convey lessons far longer than iron or stone. Legends endure not because they are factual, but because they resonate with truth, moral or psychological. And so, the Iron Maiden occupies a peculiar place in history, a crossroads between fact and myth, reality and imagination. It reminds us that human suffering has always existed, both in deeds and in stories. It demonstrates that fear is a tool, wielded in countless ways across centuries, by rulers, by storytellers, by society itself. The spikes of the Maiden are metaphorical as much as physical, piercing not flesh, but consciousness, shaping how generations perceive cruelty and morality. Even today, the Iron Maiden resonates in popular culture, in literature, in documentaries, and in the enduring fascination with medieval punishment. It reminds us of the fragility of human life, the potency of fear, and the enduring need to confront cruelty, both real and imagined. Its legend teaches vigilance, empathy, and reflection, warning us against the allure of suffering as entertainment and the dangers of unquestioned authority. As we step back from its shadow, one lesson remains clear. The Iron Maiden is not simply a story about a machine. It is a story about human nature, about the ways we imagine pain and horror, the ways fear can control, the ways curiosity can coexist with dread. It is a story about the mind's power to create monsters and the responsibility that comes with that power. The spikes may never have pierced flesh, but they have pierced centuries of thought, imagination, and morality. And perhaps this is the true horror, and the ultimate lesson, not the pain itself, but the idea of pain, not the device, but the story we tell ourselves. Fear survives beyond reality. It lingers in whispers, drawings, exhibitions, and in the corners of our imagination. The Iron Maiden stands eternal, silent, unyielding, a monument to both human cruelty and human fascination, a reminder that the shadows of the past continue to shape us. History, legend, and psychology converge here. The Iron Maiden teaches that the scariest instruments are not always those of steel, but those forged in the human mind. And as long as curiosity and fear endure, its legacy will continue. A chilling echo of the dark dance between imagination, morality, and terror that defines human experience. In the end, the Iron Maiden is more than a machine. It is a mirror, a warning, a ghost of human fascination. Its spikes reach not into flesh, but into the deepest corners of our collective consciousness, where fear, morality, and imagination intertwine, shaping the way we see ourselves and the world around us. And in that reflection, we find the enduring lesson. The stories we tell about cruelty, whether real or imagined, are as powerful as the instruments themselves. Fear, like legend, never truly dies. It simply waits, in shadow, ready to take shape again.